Greetings everyone. Welcome to the lecture on the making of Indian national movement 1870 to 1947. Presently, we are discussing the important developments that were taking place in the beginning of 20th century and how they shaped the turn of events. In this background, we are going to refer to the role played by Muslim League and thereafter. The All India Muslim League was formed at Dhaka in 1906 by a group of Muslim landlords and Nawabs. The League supported the partition of Bengal that had been proposed in 1905, and some seats in the council were reserved for the Muslims. The League wanted the representatives for those seats to be elected by Muslim voters. This demand was willingly accepted by the government in 1909 because they were conveniently playing the card of divide and rule. Finally, there was a split in Congress also in 1907 because of the differences in opinion among the moderates and the extremists. The moderates were opposed to the use of any kind of violence, and after this split, the Congress came to be dominated for some time by the moderate leaders. In 1915, however, the two groups united, and in 1916, the Congress and Muslim League also signed a historic Lucknow Pact, and they decided to work together for achieving representative government in the country and to attain the goals of nationalism that both these parties were striving for. Jinnah emerged as an undisputed leader of the Muslim League. He pushed for a separate identity for Muslims, however, not in the beginning but much later. He had been a middle-class lawyer educated in Britain. He initially supported the cause of unity and was also described as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. In fact, he was the one who had proposed Lucknow Pact. However, there had been disagreements with Mahatma Gandhi which led to Muslim Congress split. Jinnah began to fear the domination of Congress and an imaginary fear of a Hindu Raj. He began to support the idea for an independent homeland, Pakistan, or land of the pure, but that also happened much later and not in the beginning phase of the Muslim League. He was an Indian politician who had successfully campaigned for an independent Pakistan and also became its first leader. He joined INC but left it to fight for an independent Pakistan for the newly formed Muslim League. He had always believed that Hindu-Muslim unity was possible, but reluctantly came to the view that partition was essential to safeguard the rights of Indian Muslims. He became the first Governor General of Pakistan. And if we talk about the historical genesis of this idea, he had put forward his 14 points in 1929 to try to make a compromise with the INC. And some of the important points were: Muslim representation should not be less than 1/3 in the legislative branch. Then representation of minorities should have separate electorates. The constitution should provide safeguards and protect the Muslim culture. But INC rejected these points and pushed for his exit. So finally, the gulf kept on widening between INC and the Muslim League. In 1938, Jinnah met with Gandhi, Nehru and other leaders of INC and insisted that INC should recognize the Muslim League as the sole party of India's Muslim. Gandhi and INC refused, and the split between the two groups became imminent. So we see that all these political developments had an impact on the coming years, and what eventually resulted in was the partition of India and creation of Pakistan. Now, before we go further, let us go back again to the evolution of nationalism and what happened after the so-called extremist phase of nationalism. The World War had ended the myth of the indestructible power of the British Empire in India, as the British faced many humiliating defeats during the war. This largely raised the self-confidence among Indians. So World War I opened a new chapter for Indian nationalism. The soldiers who returned after the war, they raised the morale of the masses. India had supported Britain in World War on its promise of fighting for democracy, but serving India with Rowlatt Act immediately after the war served as an eye-opener for Indians. And this led to the rise of national consciousness, and soon non-cooperation movement was to be launched. There were some other changes also that had happened on the international scene. For example, formation of USSR after the war, which led to the rise of communism in India also, with the formation of CPI, which imparted a socialist influence on the freedom struggle. Then the Indian national movement and the country's socio-economic development did not take place in isolation. World War I had linked India to several global events in profound ways, and this had far-reaching consequences. So if we talk about the political impact of World War I, we can say that the return of Punjabi soldiers after the end of the war aroused political activity against colonial rule in the province of Punjab, which became the spark for further wider protests in other parts of the country. Punjab, which supplied a large proportion of the troops for British Army, turned into an epicenter of nationalism after World War I. There was also a surge of nationalism and rise of mass civil disobedience when the Montague-Chelmsford reforms failed to deliver on the expectation of Home Rule that had led to popular support for the British war effort. As the war dragged on, casualties mounted and recruitment methods grew more coercive, and resentment also grew among Indians, which further fueled nationalism. As you can see in this visual, Indians had participated, they were forced to participate in huge number to provide the armed strength on the side of the Britain. So the war that continued from 1914 to 1918 had definite implications. It also changed the economic and political situation in India. If we talk about the changing economic situation, then inflation was one very important aspect. There was a sharp rise in prices, which increased further the problems for the masses. The business groups reaped huge profits because the war increased the demand for all kinds of goods. Reduced imports meant that the new demand was being met by the Indian business houses. So the business groups now started demanding more opportunities for development, for investment, and it also kind of motivated them towards nationalist goals of independence. Many people from the villages were forced to serve in the British Army during the war years. Exposure to alien lands helped them in understanding the exploitation that was being done by the colonial powers in other parts of the world also. And the Russian Revolution that took place in 1917 also largely boosted the morals of peasants and workers because it conveyed the ideas of control by peasants and workers. The idea of socialism also became popular among nationalists in India. Now going forward, what appeared and what became very important as a phase in Indian nationalism was the advent of Gandhi. Advent of Mahatma Gandhi created a new kind of mobilization, and while Mahatma Gandhi had moved to South Africa and he had studied abroad, but due to apartheid policies he had been thrown out of a train by a Britisher, and this realization unleashed a movement. He formed a group called Natal Indian Congress in 1894 and started Satyagraha in South Africa. Because of his movements against racial restrictions in South Africa, he became a very popular and respected leader. And from 1915 onwards, with his return to India, at first he wanted to understand the people, the conditions that were prevalent in India, their needs and the overall situation in India. So the first year he spent in traveling throughout the country. And his earliest participation in local movements like in Champaran, Kheda, Ahmedabad, all these provided him with the much needed ground reality. The 1917 Champaran Satyagraha and the establishment of Sabarmati Ashram, these were some very important developments. Mahatma Gandhi had studied law in England and had practiced in South Africa. He had joined INC before World War I. He had become the leader of INC because he was better able to relate to the problems of the masses, and throughout he believed in the idea of non-violent resistance or Satyagraha. From 1920, non-cooperation movement or Asahyog Andolan that was started by him became hugely popular, and he became the main leader of INC in 1921. In 1929, a very important resolution was passed in Lahore for Sampurna Swaraj or complete independence. Then 1930, 26th January was observed as Independence Day, and in March 1930 he planned Dandi March or Namak Satyagraha, in which he travelled more than 390 kilometers on foot from Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi in Gujarat in almost 24 days. Another very important movement that was going to take place was 1942 Quit India movement, where the famous slogan given by him was "Do or Die." Mahatma Gandhi along with several other Congress leaders were arrested, and this was followed by heavy protest throughout the country. And finally, as a result of all these developments and also participation by the masses, India finally got freedom on 15th August 1947. This is a very famous visual of the leaders, as you can see. Now, when we talk about the important role played by Mahatma Gandhi and how he became hugely popular in such a short span of time, we must mention the impact of Rowlatt Acts and the Amritsar Massacre, and how this not only created a very conducive atmosphere for a more active political mobilization, but also popularity of Mahatma Gandhi. Indian nationalists demanded freedom in 1919, hoping that their cooperation during World War I would bring positive results. But how did the British respond? Instead of giving them freedom, they further limited their freedom of press, and General Dyer banned their right to public gatherings after 5 British officials had been killed during a protest. And what happened after that, as we all know, was the infamous Jallianwala Bagh massacre, as you can see in this visual. On April 13th, 1919, 10,000 Indians had gathered for protest in Jallianwala, Bagh, and General Dyer and his troops opened fire, as a result of which hundreds were dead and thousands were wounded. The incident had increased violence, had incited violence, and this further led to rising distrust of the British rule. So a peaceful demonstration against British resulted in death of innocent Indians, and this convinced Mahatma Gandhi and other leaders that cooperation with the British was only a dream and nothing would emerge out of it. So we see that from 1920 to 1922, first Satyagraha was launched in India. So Amritsar massacre definitely played a very important role in this. The first Satyagraha was designed to make the British rule non-functional through a complete non-violent boycott. And as a result of this, several Indians were jailed, and finally when the movement turned violent at Chauri Chaura, the movement was abruptly called off by Mahatma Gandhi. As you can see, some of the visuals of non-cooperation movement. Now during this phase, several British businesses went out of business in India because Indians were boycotting imported goods, and several Indians who were boycotting these goods were imprisoned and lathi charged. So the British reaction in 1922 was obvious and expected, and they realized the threat that Mahatma Gandhi posed. So in March 1922, Mahatma Gandhi was arrested and he was charged with sedition because he was encouraging others to break the law. And the case against Mahatma Gandhi was clear. He himself had written about non-cooperation, and he was of the opinion that if the overthrow of the government had to be attained, then non-cooperation was the only recourse that one could take. So Gandhi pleaded guilty, and the trial gave him publicity, which further increased his popularity. And the judge admitted that the case of Mahatma Gandhi was indeed a special case. He was sentenced to 6 years prison, though he did not serve the whole sentence because he had fallen ill, and he had to be released because the Britishers were too scared that if he would die in jail, then havoc will be created. So therefore, we see that henceforward Mahatma Gandhi focused on constructive work, especially khadi, which was very dear as a cause to him. Another very important parallel movement that had an impact on the political condition, on the prevalent political condition, was the Khilafat movement that took off in 1919. After the First World War, a very harsh treaty had been imposed on the Turkish Khalifa. The leaders of the Khilafat agitation, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, wanted to associate it with the non-cooperation movement. The Muslims wanted the Khalifa to retain control over Muslim sacred places in the erstwhile Ottoman Empire, which had been under Turkey. And Mahatma Gandhi supported the Khilafat movement because this was considered as a golden opportunity also to forge Hindu-Muslim unity. So we see that a number of people's initiatives were also taken. Several leaders like Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das, C. Rajgopalachari and Asaf Ali, they gave up their law practices. Several British titles were surrendered and legislatures were also boycotted. The Patidar peasants of Kheda in Gujarat, they organized non-violent campaigns against the high land revenue demand. Liquor shops were picketed in coastal Andhra and interior Tamil Nadu also, which shows that the non-cooperation movement was widespread, and it was not only based in North India. The tribals and poor peasants in several areas, for example in Guntur district in Andhra Pradesh, started a number of forest satyagrahas to protest against the new colonial forest laws. So we see that the Khilafat non-cooperation movement gave enormous support, got enormous support from people in different areas, whether they were in Sindh or Bengal, in South India, in Punjab. The Akali agitation of the Sikhs demanded a removal of the corrupt mahants from gurudwaras, while in Assam, the tea garden labourers demanded a hike in their wages, and they shouted the slogan Gandhi Maharaj ki Jai. There were several folk songs in Assam where in these songs Mahatma Gandhi was referred to as Gandhi Raja. So what we see was that gradually Gandhi was emerging as people's Mahatma. He was being considered as Messiah by some, and also as a harbinger of class caste unity, as someone who would help poor peasants fight against zamindars. And peasants in Pratapgarh in United Provinces also managed to stop illegal eviction of tenants in name of support from Mahatma Gandhi. So here we see that one must also analyze the role of rumour, and what Shahid Amin has described, that how rumour was very important in making Gandhi a Mahatma, because people had a mind of their own. So very often they had their own vision about the kind of future they wanted to see for themselves, and very conveniently they tried to justify their actions or their aspirations in name of Mahatma Gandhi. So as a result of all these developments and the future course of action that was going to take place from 1922 to 1929 was largely decided by the violent turn of events at Chauri Chaura, and so Mahatma Gandhi called off non-cooperation movement in 1922 when people put fire to a police station, killing 22 policemen. And he called now for constructive works in rural areas. C.R. Das, who was a lawyer in East Bengal, and Motilal Nehru were of the opinion that parties should fight elections to enter councils and influence government policies, as by leaving everything, the matter could not be resolved. Now this is also a time when we see a number of other divergent trends that were appearing in political scene, which we will be discussing in the next lecture. Thank you.